Hi everyone, this is Dr. Stefan. In this video, I'd like to cover a very important topic. I'm actually super excited to talk about this one. I've managed to put together a bit of a comprehensive list of tips and understanding for those who want to quit smoking. And I think it's something really important. I've been putting off making this video, this episode for a very long time because I just wanted to get it right, and hopefully I have done so. But anyway, this is for anyone who's trying to quit smoking, or maybe if you know someone who's trying to quit smoking, you want to maybe share this information with them and help them in their journey. And just to give you some understanding of why it's so hard for some people to quit, because you may hear these people who say, well, I've tried to quit smoking, I've just packed it in one day, I just stopped. But that's not the experience for most people. Most people actually really struggle to give it up. They relapse a lot. They quit for a couple of months, then something stressful happens and comes back. And in this video, I want to just cover exactly that, why it can be sometimes difficult to not go back to smoking. It's really hard. And let's just think about that in the next few minutes. So actually, most smokers want to quit. This is something that I've seen in practice, actually. So I'm trained as a pulmonologist. I see, of course, a lot of people with lung disease. So I may have a bit of a biased view on why smoking is bad for you because of the things that I've seen. But at some point, for most smokers, what happens is they experience less pleasure and more addiction, more irritability when they don't smoke. A lot of things that happen that actually doesn't make it enjoyable to smoke anymore. And they want to quit, but they're so far into the addiction that it can be really tricky. So let's cover a lot of things in this video. And first of all, through this episode, I want you to get you to the understanding that we need to know what the beast is, what this addiction to smoking beast is, because it is an addiction. It is a condition, an addiction that has three main components. One of it is a physical component. So, of course, you're addicted to the nicotine. Then it's a psychological component. So, what smoking does for you to maybe calm you down. And then it's a social component of the addiction, which is peer pressure sometimes to smoke. So, if we understand all these components and how they fit into our lives, it's a lot easier to change habits, which can be very hard to change. So, we need to do it one step at a time. But that's the key to actually quitting for good. It can be hard. So it will be hard. For most people, it will be really hard. Maybe the hardest things that they will have to do in their lives. Because beating addiction to anything, not only smoking, is really hard. So that's something that I really empathize with. And I'm not trying to judge anyone who's smoking through this video. I'm not trying to say that you need to quit if you don't want to. But do consider it, because there are huge benefits. So you know that. All the literature that you read online will tell you about the benefits. I'm not going to dwell and give you just these numbers that seem pulled out of a hat sometimes, but just to make you aware of one thing. So when you are smoking, you are gambling with the good years of your life. Now, of course, there will be people who do not get any lung disease, any heart disease when they smoke, but they're the minority. So you are actually taking your chances and the odds are not in your favor. So if you smoke, you have a high risk of getting lung, heart, vascular disease, but a low chance of being healthy later in life. If you don't smoke, if you're a non-smoker, you have a low risk of heart disease, lung disease, vascular disease, but a higher chance of being healthy. So personally, I would take the odds in the second option, but that's up to everyone. So what can you do to quit smoking if that's what you're planning to do? It goes back to habits and addiction. And that's where it gets really hard. So if you want to really quit for good, forever, never smoke again, never again, that's where you need to deconstruct the addiction components that I mentioned before, the three. So, physical, we need to think about whether you need some treatment for the cravings that you're having from the nicotine itself. Psychological, tips to become aware of where the psychological component of the addiction plays a role in your life. And socially, what are some practical tips to not be the odd one out who's trying to quit among your peer group? Because that's really important. So we need to ideally fight the addiction to smoking on all three fronts. And that can be hard. But otherwise, this is why most smokers actually relapse, because they may be very good at taking nicotine replacement therapy, for example, chewing the nicotine gum, but they're not doing the psychological part, the psychological work. Or they're doing the psychological work, they don't feel that smoking plays an important role in their lives anymore, but peer pressure, socializing, sometimes is associated with smoking. So that can be difficult. However, if you tackle this addiction and you manage to overcome smoking, in this process, you will learn so much about yourself. And I think that's where it's also valuable. It's a journey of improvement, much better than reading self-help books. So if you do this, you achieve something practical. And you will become better at life, at dealing with other challenges as well. So if you can beat smoking, you can beat pretty much anything else because it's a beast. So you'll be able to deal with other addictive behaviors, maybe in relationships, maybe codependence, maybe other things that tie into this matter. And you can read about this further if you want. But I guarantee you, you will be a much better person if you manage to beat smoking for good, forever. And then, everyone will mention that you may be able to actually save some money while becoming healthier, which is a great thing because then you can use that money to reinvest in yourself and build up on those health achievements. So you can go on nice trips, you can be in the sun, you can go to the beach, you can go to a gym, sign up for a gym membership for the same money that you're paying for your cigarettes every month, go to a nice restaurant dinner with your partner, buy healthy food. All these things that can help. So let's tackle the three components. I will start with the physical, then move on to the psychological and social. And I will try to give you examples as much as I can along the way, so it helps you to follow this bit of advice and these tips. First of all, the physical component of nicotine addiction. So this is the nicotine that you're addicted to. When you're smoking, you're actually delivering nicotine to your brain. This is what happens, right? If you boil it down, if you simplify it to the very basics, whatever you're doing, if you're smoking cigarettes, pipes, water pipes, shisha, nargile in Arabic countries, if you're using vapes containing nicotine, that's what gets you addicted, hooked on to the smoking, onto whatever delivery device you're using. It's getting that nicotine. And it's important that especially when you smoke tobacco, it hits the brain in seconds. So this is why it's a very sharp hit to your brain. And then you get this spike of nicotine going to your brain. Then the levels slowly drop. But this spike leads to alterations in the brain's chemistry, how the receptors interact with the nicotine. So this is very, very important to understand because the body is really smart. If you give it nicotine from outside sources, you get that sharp hit. Fewer receptors to deal with the nicotine to stimulate the brain are necessary because the body is trying to save resources. So then you're actually giving it an ample supply of nicotine from outside sources. And then the body just gets used to having that. So it downgrades some of the production of these receptors to save energy. So then you need more and more for the same effect. This is called tolerance, building up tolerance to the nicotine. So people tend to, it's not as important as in addictions to opioids, for example, but it is present. Those sharp hits and then slow decline, needing another sharp hit to get that same effect is really important in nicotine addiction. So it's important to really understand this. So what happens when you're not giving your brain that supply of nicotine and it's already built up a bit of tolerance? So it's the same for any other addiction, but here as well, not only for nicotine, but you will get craving. You'll get something called craving. Your body needs, it's like you have this desire to have that cigarette, which can be overpowering. Once the nicotine levels slowly decline below a level that's low enough for your body, that depends from person to person what the level of addiction is, you may become irritable, agitated, you have anxiety, and you'll feel this overpowering need to get a fix, to get a cigarette, to smoke something that delivers nicotine, that sharp hit of nicotine to your brain. And actually, this need can sometimes overpower rational and healthy behavior. So addiction can overpower reason. And I think you've seen this in so many documentaries about addiction and not to other components, but people don't talk about nicotine addiction in the same way because it's more socially acceptable than maybe heroin use, for example. But the principles are the same. And the thing is, most smokers actually know it's bad. We've had all this advertising against smoking You've seen it everywhere, especially, I don't know, in Western countries. I don't know where you are in the world watching this video, but it's full of these little posters everywhere that tell you that smoking is bad. You know, you buy a packet of cigarettes, it tells you that you'll get cancer and other things. So it's always there. You know it's bad for you, but you can't stop because the addiction overpowers the reason. And this is really important to be aware of. And this may seem extreme that I'm talking about nicotine as if I'm talking about cocaine or any other illegal substance, but the addiction processes are the same. So it's important to think about it and know that you're fighting a very powerful beast. So how do you combat physical addiction? Basically, you first of all need to assess how addicted you really are, because for different people it can be different. But first of all, you can ask yourself the first question: how much do you really smoke? Many smokers are not fully aware of how much they smoke, so sometimes it can be helpful to just journal and write down how many cigarettes you smoked every single day. And just do that for a week. You don't have to suddenly start to go on a quest to just stop smoking immediately. It's good to do the groundwork. This is why I'm telling you about these things, to understand the addiction first, because then you'll be in a much better position. You'll be prepared to fight it. So understanding where you are, being very extremely honest with yourself and saying, well, look, I'm smoking 27 cigarettes per day, maybe. I'm just over a packet of cigarettes a day. And just writing that number down. It's helpful to write it in cigarettes, because then if you want to slowly reduce the number, you can just follow and track over time how many cigarettes you're actually smoking every day, and you can see your progress. And it's nice to keep a journal. I really advise this for a lot of things. Then the other question to ask is, how early in the day do you have your first cigarette? Because that's also an indication of a strong addiction. If you feel the need to get a cigarette as soon as you wake up, it's probably because your levels of nicotine in your blood have been running low overnight. So you've been sleeping for 6, 7, 8 hours. You haven't had a cigarette. Your levels go down. As soon as you wake up, you're looking for that cigarette. You're looking for that fix. Where are my cigarettes? So it's important to be aware that your level of addiction is guided by how many cigarettes you smoke in a day. So it's important to know that number on average, maybe in a given week, how many do you smoke a day? And how early in the morning do you feel the need to smoke a cigarette? If you smoke maybe over a packet of cigarettes a day, and you feel the need to have a cigarette you have your first cigarette of the day within 10 minutes of waking up, 30 minutes of waking up, probably indicates that you are quite addicted to the nicotine, and it might be a tougher process for you to handle when you're trying to quit. So bearing that in mind, you may be more aggressive in your efforts to quit, and you might have to deal with more components of the addiction. You may need more therapy in terms of medications to stop the cravings, and you may not be able to do it on your own. If you have a very strong level of addiction, you may need to search for a smoking cessation specialist or a counselor to help you deal with this. So it's important to know that you will need to let your body chemistry readjust, and you have to commit to quitting forever. So that's the only way to stop for good. So you need to give your body ample time to readjust to the reduction progressively of nicotine input. So how do you do that? How do you combat the physical addiction? Let's get into it a bit more in detail. This is what I'm trying to get here. The main thing that you can do is to set a quit date. So if you think, well, I'm going to try and quit smoking, maybe you don't want to do it the next day. Maybe you need to think about, especially if you have a high level of addiction, how long do you think it might take you to actually stop, to reduce your input of nicotine via smoking, shisha, whatever you're using as a delivery system? How long do you think it will take your body to readjust? And you need to think about this by maybe comparing it, how long it would take you to change a habit. So say if you've never gone to the gym, but then you start going to exercise progressively, you may not be able to just suddenly shift and start going. You might need to build up, ramp up progressively. So maybe you can think about quitting smoking a few months ahead of the actual quit date. So you may set a date for before your birthday or before a major holiday in your culture, maybe before Christmas, before Ramadan starts or something along these lines. you may want to think about it 2 months in advance, 3 months in advance. I'm going to try and quit on that day. And then you start to do the work to train, to prepare for the day. So how do you do that? You can do it in a couple of ways. If you want to do it without any therapies, without anything, but I'll cover these in the next few moments, you can slowly increase the delay between cigarettes. So when you feel the need to smoke, maybe try to just power through that feeling a little bit, which can be very, very difficult, but just maybe push it back 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and just congratulate yourself for doing that. And then have your cigarette if you need to have your cigarette. But just trying to delay this time between each cigarette by progressively longer and longer periods of time, it will readjust your body's chemistry. Your body will start to, hang on, I'm not getting the nicotine. I need to readjust my chemistry again because I need to adapt. So your body is really good at adapting, both positively and negatively. So by delaying that delivery of nicotine, your body needs to adjust to the fact that, well, I may not be getting my nicotine at this time. I need to adjust. It's really important to think about it in this way. Treat your body as if it's a being that you're trying to train. Okay? The other thing you can do when you do smoke, so you're trying to delay the time, but you're also trying to smoke less each time. So maybe you're not burning the whole cigarette. Maybe you're just leaving 10%, 20%. I'm just going to throw this away. This again reduces that peak, that sharp peak of nicotine in your brain, just brings it down a notch. So then your body again will think, well, I'm not getting enough nicotine, so I need to readjust my chemistry. So just doing these things and progressively lengthening the time between cigarettes, smoking less, and maybe reducing the total number of cigarettes that you're smoking every day, and you can keep a journal of how you're progressing with this. This can help you readjust your chemistry, so this helps you beat the physical addiction. This is how you do it. Then, if this doesn't work, please do not feel embarrassed to seek suggestions from a smoking cessation specialist in your area. There are these people around the world, and they can also give you treatments because there are many, many treatment options available. So you may not be able to beat the physical addiction on your own by just applying what I've said before, by reducing the number of cigarettes progressively, delaying the time between cigarettes, how much you smoke, etc. So what are the options for treatment? Let me cover that now. First of all, there's nicotine replacement therapy, or NRT. You might find it as this. This is just pharmacologically pure nicotine. You're not getting that through a cigarette, so it minimizes the other side effects, the particulate matter that you're inhaling, because that's actually causing the damage, not necessarily the nicotine itself. It's the other things in the cigarette smoke. And basically, you're not using smoking, you're not vaping, you're not doing anything. You're just getting pharmacologically pure nicotine in a different form. Now, this is where most people do not understand, actually, how nicotine replacement therapy should be done. So you do it in a very specific way. So you need to give yourself a baseline level of nicotine in your blood. So this is what your specialist will prescribe to you. Maybe something like a patch that goes on your shoulder. So the patches are different strength depending on your level of addiction. So your smoking cessation specialist will prescribe to you the right patches. So you need to discuss with them depending on your situation. Then those patches give you a baseline level of nicotine. It may reduce your cravings to some extent, but it doesn't cut it completely. So your brain will still want those sharp peaks of nicotine that you can get every now and then. So you need to add a second form of nicotine replacement therapy, not only patches. Patches by themselves, they don't do that much, but you generally give yourself a patch as a baseline, and then you have another form of nicotine that you're administering to yourself in a different format to mimic those peaks that you're getting when you're lighting up the cigarettes and the nicotine hits your brain in seconds. So you can have that either through chewing nicotine gum, maybe lozenges they're like little bits of candy that contain nicotine that you can keep in your mouth, and then this releases that quick acting nicotine that you can use to cut the craving when you feel like having a cigarette. There's inhalators, which look a little bit like a normal cigarette, but they don't produce any smoke. They just give you a little bit of nicotine that you just inhale. Looks a bit like a cigarette, more or less, but it also mimics this association of the gesture, because that can also be a component of the addiction. Really important to think about these things. All these associations, everything that you're doing is a habit. It's a ritual. And then there are also nasal sprays. So sometimes you can get a nasal spray just like for congestion or anything like that, and that can give you a boost of nicotine when you feel like having a cigarette. But that allows you to stop smoking to some extent or reduce the amount of smoking, but then you're reducing the amount of particulates that you're inhaling and all these things. So this is the way you do it with nicotine replacement therapy. You need a baseline and something to combat those peaks. So you're trying to combat all these elements of the craving, because your body craves a baseline level of nicotine, but also craves that push that gets in there when you're smoking a cigarette. Then other treatment options. There is another medication called bupropion. Sometimes it's called Zyban or Wellbutrin. This is an antidepressant medication, but it has been shown to have some effect on reducing the cravings associated with nicotine addiction, with smoking addiction. Another medication that you may have heard of is varenicline or Champix or Chantix. So again, your smoking cessation specialist will recommend maybe one of these. Another tablet which you can consider is cytizine or Tabax. This is something that, again, you can find in some places around the world. And all of these are good options. Ideally, you would want to combine medication options and nicotine replacement therapy with counseling. Because generally, if you need to use the medication, you may need some further advice on how to combat the other components that are involved in nicotine addiction. And I will discuss these in the second part of this video. So I'm getting there slowly. But it's important to understand all these concepts if you really want to win this battle against smoking and just quit the addiction forever. So what you need to do is basically think about how do you break the physical unpleasantness, but also what gets you smoking in the first place? How do you break these associations and habits? And this is where I want to take this video now. It's a segue into psychological addiction and social addiction, if you could call it that. So these components. So let me just get there in a second. Apologies, I just had a sip of my water. But psychological addiction, really important. It's a huge component of why smokers do not quit. And they come back to the cigarettes. It's really what gets people smoking in the first place, alongside social factors. So I do encourage you, if you're trying to go on this smoking cessation journey, to keep maybe a journal where you write things out, pen and paper, just analyze yourself and become self-aware of what's really triggering you. Because you may be surprised to find associations that you have with smoking. Maybe you're smoking to calm yourself down in stressful situations. Maybe smoking has become a ritual for you. And this is where the component of psychological addiction in smoking is really, really important. Smoking is seen by many as some kind of a ritual. Like if you think about going to church, going to the things that you're doing, habits are a bit ritualistic. So maybe you're smoking your cigarette every time you wake up, you go outside on your balcony or just outside your house or in your kitchen, and you light up as soon as you wake up. Maybe you like to have your cigarette as you're having a cup of coffee. Or maybe while you're commuting, while you're driving, while you're stuck at the traffic light, you just light up a cigarette. And that's part of a ritual that you've been employing for maybe 10 years, 20 years. So just identifying those patterns is really important, because you may want to shift those. Because imagine, maybe you're cutting the physical cravings by using nicotine replacement therapy, reducing the amount of smoking that you're doing, but then you may miss those rituals, those morning rituals of coffee, cigarette, soon as you wake up. You may miss that. So you need to think about ways how you cope with that in a different way, because otherwise you may come back to smoking during a stressful time. So becoming really aware of what you're doing day to day, all of us, myself included, we sometimes live our lives on reflexes, subconsciously. We don't know why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. And it's really important sometimes to become aware. And it's valid for all things in life, not only smoking. So don't be asleep at the wheel, if we could say that. Take the harnesses of your life and just guide it in the direction that you want it to go. But that is very hard. It's easier said than done. but you need to start thinking about how you can break these habits, these psychological barriers to quitting smoking. And you may have to do it one at a time. So, for example, if you're smoking while you're driving and you're smoking while you're having your coffee, you may want to just give up one at a time. Maybe just don't smoke while you're having your coffee. Just have your coffee and, I don't know, piece of a cookie or something else that's not as damaging as the smoking. Do it day by day. And then this is a kind reminder I really encourage people to keep journals of what they're doing in their lives, because you can just come back. You don't even have to write out like paragraphs and paragraphs, but it's a way to track your progress in life. How many cigarettes you're smoking? What have you done these days? What's some association that maybe you're not aware of? And just be really honest. You can be completely honest with your pen and a piece of paper and just write things down, because no one will judge you. That's only between you and the paper. You don't have to talk to another person, a therapist, or anything else. Just, it's great. And then another bonus tip about psychological habits and things like that, you may want to think about people who have quit smoking, or maybe it's been your case as well, when you've reduced or stopped smoking almost completely in times of illness, when you were forced by life situations, maybe hospitalization or something like that, you were forced to break your patterns. You had no access to cigarettes, you were feeling unwell, it was not just an ideal situation for you, and smoking was the last thing on your mind. But you managed to do it for maybe 1 week, 2 weeks. You didn't smoke at all. And you may want to think about why that is. Is it because you cannot beat it? Or is it because maybe there's things that you're associating with the smoking that maybe if you get rid of, you may actually stop completely? So I'd like to really, really encourage you to see the psychological associations that you have to smoking. And if you do sometimes get an opportunity to really shift your life patterns, because you're maybe on a vacation or during a holiday season, you don't have access to cigarettes, use these as opportunities to help you break these patterns. And I think that really helps. The final thing, the third thing, let's talk about the social aspect of smoking, which is, in my opinion, a very, very big issue, especially in today's society, which is so much more connected than before. We are craving social interaction in large groups, and sometimes we miss that. We want the feeling of community. We want to be with our friends, with our family. And if they smoke, if your entourage smokes, and it's maybe a cultural norm in your society to smoke, it can be extremely hard to break the pattern. Quitting smoking may feel really, really unpleasant, because you also feel like you're losing some of that connection to your peer group. And that can be really, really important. It can make it harder to quit, but it's not impossible. So there are ways around it. But it's important to just take stock of your own life situation in terms of social networks and interactions and how that relates to smoking. Again, journaling helps, but let me give you some examples specifically and what you can do to maybe work through that. So let's take the example of maybe you are smoking with your colleagues at work during breaks. You take breaks, smoke breaks. You go with your colleagues on the balcony of the office building or just outside. You go to the smoking place, whatever. And that's where, you're socializing, you're exchanging little gossips about work, things like that. It could be also the example of socializing when you're going out to restaurants, bars, clubs, and everyone goes outside. Your friends go outside to smoke. And you want to join because you're part of the group. Not going with the smokers feels bad. Fear of missing out, FOMO. You feel like you're going to miss out on all the gossips, all the chit-chat, all the things. You might miss opportunities to meet someone you like, and all these things tie in. You'll feel sometimes, if you're the one who's trying to quit, but all your other friends and family members are still smoking actively, you'll feel like you're not part of the group. And just saying that out loud and becoming aware of it, writing it down, is the first step to becoming aware of it. So how can you combat that? So first of all, I would recommend personally to still go on that smoke break, but don't smoke. So you can be with the smokers if you want. And I'm not trying to insult anyone by saying smokers. I'm just saying you go with your friends who smoke. We go with the people you're out with. You go with them to smoke, but you don't do it. You just stay with them for all the other interactions, but you don't actually smoke yourself. And that's so much easier said than done. And I know, but you can do it. But let me give you some tips on how to deal with that. First of all, expect to be mocked. Expect it that your friends will make some nasty comments, or they'll tease you about it. Oh, why don't you smoke? You don't want to be part of the group. You don't want to be like us. Oh, you're so much better than us. Blah blah blah. So all these things will happen. Just expect to be mocked, and it's okay. It's okay for people to mock you. It's fine. Sometimes people do that just because they want to project their own insecurities onto you, because they may feel that you are moving on to something better and they are not, and that can activate their insecurity. So just be aware of that. Sometimes when people are nasty to you, or they mock you, or they disrespect you a little bit, has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's all about them and how they are just relating to that specific situation. So really think about that. So just try to be neutral, act in a neutral manner. Don't act superior with your friends if you're trying to quit and they're still smoking. Keep it factual, facts only. You can just say something like, I just want to be healthier overall. It's my personal choice. You guys do what you want. You tell your friend, you can do what you want. I don't mind that you smoke. Just do it. But for me, I just want to make a little change in my life. I'm going to try. Maybe I succeed, maybe I don't. So be non-threatening. Don't try to pretend like you're a know-it-all, because that's going to be very bad. And then remember that most people, friends included, family members, everyone else, they tend to think more about themselves than about you. And that's it's human nature. Sometimes when we walk down the street, we cross paths with someone and we make eye contact and we think, well, this person thinks that of me, but then the other person thinks the same. So we're all just kind of in our own space most of the time. And even if someone, for example, makes a mocking comment to you, some kind of a joke about you trying to quit smoking, they'll probably forget about it afterwards if you don't react in a negative way, if you don't become defensive. If you just like brush it off and yeah, okay, they're gonna mock me, it's fine. And with time, they'll actually get used to you not smoking, to seeing you coming to the events, to the smoke breaks, but you're not smoking, but you're still there. So you're not betraying your friends, you're not leaving them behind, you're still there with them, but you're just not smoking yourself, and that they'll get used to that new you with time. But you have to give it time. Sometimes those changes can be hard to incorporate socially. But they may actually feel inspired by your attempts to quit smoking. And someone from your friend group at some point may actually come to you for advice. They may not admit it to the rest of the group, but they may be just like you, but they may bond over the fact that they may try to quit smoking as well. So it's something that you can do then. You can support them in a non-judgmental way, like I said before. But it needs to come from them. So it needs to be their idea. If someone wants to quit, it really needs to be their desire to do so. So don't ever push anyone from your friend group to quit smoking. Don't make nasty comments. Just be neutral. Think about it as your own personal choice. Expect that you'll be mocked a little bit, maybe. There may be some jokes, and this is how humans interact sometimes among close-knit groups. But just brush it off and just say to them, it's my choice. I just want to get better. At this, it's up to you what you guys do. It's fine. I'm just going to hang out here, but not smoke. That's fine. Then another example. Let's think about your family who smokes. So this is another component of this social aspect. So if your family is, you come from a family where your father, your mother, your sisters, your brothers, they all smoke, you may assume that it's normal behavior to smoke. And that's not the case. Because, for example, personally, I didn't come from a family, my parents didn't smoke. But I know families where parents smoked and then their kids, who are my friends, were more likely to smoke. They found it more acceptable. They assumed that's the normal. And it's just how we are built up. But I think the same advice that I've given you with your friends, you can implement if you're trying to quit, but your whole family still smokes. You just need to try not to act superior, act like different. Just be neutral and say that this is your personal choice. You just want to give it a go and see how it works. And to be honest, with your family, it might be easier. Even if they all smoke, they probably are aware of all the bad things that smoking brings. So they may be more supportive of you stopping because they love you unconditionally generally. So most families have unconditional love. Your friends may be more flaky sometimes, but your family will be there for you generally. So they may be more supportive of you. So you can actually just tell them, like, look, I'm just going to try and give it a go and quit smoking. Another example, if your partner smokes, so your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, if they smoke as well, and if you both smoke, then it can be hard when they're the ones who they're not trying to quit. They don't want to quit, but you want to, because you are a bit of a package deal when you're a couple. And this is just part of the compromises of being in a healthy relationship. Sometimes you have to kind of take the good and the bad. But while it can be complicated, you can sometimes see it as a way to grow together. So if you can get to that frame of mind with your partner and have just a honest, non-judgmental discussion, just say, you know what, I'm going to try and give it a go and try to quit smoking. Is this something you'd want to do? If they're very clear, you get a hard no, then maybe just back away, give them time to process. Because I think most good partners will just take a step back, think about things on their own, and then maybe you can have another discussion later. But see if you can try to quit together as a couple. Something like couple goals. And it may sound cheesy, it may sound, weird, but to be honest, it can be a great way to become stronger together, to be healthier together, to just push each other when you're slipping a little bit. And you can actually build a stronger bond as a couple by quitting smoking together. So this is another thing that I wanted to just mention. And the final thing about the social aspects of smoking, there are cultural norms around smoking. There are cultures in which smoking is very, very accepted. It's part of socializing. It's built into society. So if you think about Arabic countries where people go out and socialize by smoking shishas or nargile, you have smoking lounges where people meet and they smoke over a water pipe. They socialize. It's a nice place. It's a nice social event. It can be harder to quit in those situations because it's hard to replace those social interactions in a different way. Socializing takes part over sharing a water pipe. So how do you deal with that? What I would suggest in those situations, and of course you may need to adapt this to your own situation, you may need to take a break actually from going out for a bit. So I know it can be hard, but maybe for a few days or a few weeks to just maybe try to cut out from that way of interacting with your friends. Maybe just don't go to the smoking lounge for a couple of weeks and see how that goes. Because you might find that at the end of those 2 weeks, you actually feel like you're not that desperate about having a smoke with your friends. You may just hang out with them, but feel like, like I was telling you before, you're going with your friends to a social event and you just hang out with them, but you don't smoke yourself. It's still better. You might still be in the smoking lounge where there's lots of smoke, but it's still less than when you inhale it yourself. So passive smoking is still going to be less harmful than full-blown smoking. So just think about those things. Other things that you can maybe suggest to your friends if you're in one of these places where smoking is very, very ingrained in society is maybe to suggest doing other activities with your friends that don't involve smoking. So maybe playing sports together, or maybe attending a sporting event such as a football game, a basketball game, whatever it is. Maybe going to a cultural event with your friends, maybe just going for food, going to a restaurant together, and just spending time that way, not involving smoking, and just doing that for a while you're managing to reduce or cut down your smoking completely. So I think this is another thing to consider. And finally, before I conclude the video, this is another example from life. I think it's important if you in your country there is a push to, because I don't know where you're watching this from or listening from, but I think it's important to support health regulation in your country to maybe ban smoking in public enclosed spaces. And I can give you the example of what happened in my native country of Romania. So about 7 to 8 years ago, there was a public smoking ban in bars, restaurants, clubs, things like that. So any enclosed space, you weren't allowed to smoke anymore. And it came quite suddenly, this regulation. And initially, some people were unhappy. But that was actually, I was surprised because being in a Balkan country, we are a little bit wary about, government interference and stuff like that. So it's a very free part of the world, let's just say. So I thought that there would be a lot more pushback socially against this smoking ban in public places, but it actually wasn't. So it's only a minority of people that really complained about the smoking ban. And no one really truly wants to go back. And this is like 7-8 years after the legislation has been passed and it's been implemented. No one really wants to go back because even some smokers like it. Even some smokers like the fact that they cannot smoke in bars and restaurants anymore. And I can tell you an example because I remember the before and after, because just this happened recently. So when I was in university, for example, there was no smoking ban in place in Romania. But then, so obviously I would go out to maybe a bar, a restaurant, and it was a mess. Every time you went to a bar or a restaurant, you could just enter this room and you could cut the smoke with a knife. Literally, it was that dense. And of course, you would come out with your clothes, your hair smelling awfully after that. You couldn't wear the same clothes the next day, for example. You couldn't wear that coat the next day. You would want to hang it out outside on your balcony to air it out because it smelled so bad of smoke. So now, after the ban, people are happy that they can feel more pleasant about going to a restaurant, to a bar, because they come back home and they don't smell. And it's something that people didn't really consider before until the legislation was passed and implemented. So, and that also led to actually less pressure to smoke socially, because you don't have to see all the people who smoke around you. You know, your friends may be less likely to start smoking, or they may have to go outside to do it. So you don't have to join it. You have the option. So it's great, to be honest. And people, I think, feel back home more empowered to actually have healthier behaviors since this smoking ban was enforced. So I would say if this is something that's going on in your country, maybe consider supporting this regulation to ban smoking. I know there are places around the world where this smoking has already been banned, but in some places it's still an ongoing thing. So this was the video today. Just to conclude, so I'll give you the final message and then I'll end it. You can beat smoking forever. You can do it. I know that. But you need to become really self-aware of why you are smoking and think about the 3 components that I mentioned: physical addiction, psychological addiction, and the social component of smoking addiction. And then if you identify how each of these 3 components is playing a role in your life and why you smoke, you can then implement small changes. So you can, first of all, set a quit date. So if you're trying to quit smoking, think about it in advance. Think about it 2 months, 3 months from now, I'm going to quit. And then start training for that main event, for that day, by slowly starting to break and deconstruct the habits and patterns that you have in your life, and do it one day at a time. You have the time if you set the date far enough into the future so that you have the time to let your body's chemistry and habits adjust. Hope you found this helpful. Just as a reminder, you can listen to this as a podcast. I'll leave some links in the description below. And maybe I should ask that if you think this was helpful, maybe watch or listen again if you have some time at some point, because it may be helpful to just kind of go over the message again. I hope it helps you improve your life in some way by listening, by spending some time. And I'm grateful that you have done so up until to the end. I thank you for listening to this, and I wish you all the best and good health. And I think you can quit smoking if you really, really want to. It might be hard, but you can do it. All the best.